Afternoon, everybody. It is hot here today in the Bay Area, so sorry if I'm sweating around here, but I wanted to. It's been a while since I've been on, and so I wanted to come on and take a look at the recent Sony announcements. So let's see. It looks like I've got a couple of you here with me so far. Carlos Quintero, let's go, and James Jackson. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about you, James, in this stream. So because we're going to be talking about the Sony A7C Mark II, and let me see if I can get this straight. Everybody who's tried this so far, and I've been watching all of your content, hasn't gotten this straight. So I'm going to do it. The A7C II and the A7CR. So we're going to talk about those two camera bodies that Sony came out with just a couple days ago, yesterday I think it was. And then also the 16 to 35 G Master Mark II, which I think Gerald had a really good point about this lens in his review of the camera bodies and the lens, and that is that the lenses often are much more important than the camera bodies. However, the camera bodies get all of the traction on YouTube, all of the clicks. And so in his mind, and I agree with this, it's a bit of a disservice not to talk about the lens, or not to release the lens separately than the camera bodies. So, all right, James Jackson, talk about me. Uh-oh. Well, you know what? So let's, James, you're gonna make my segue for me here, okay? And we're gonna talk about your video about the A7C2 and the A7CR. First, though, let's go ahead and talk about what I am shooting on. Everybody always wants to know that. Right now, I am on the Canon R5C. This is the Canon 50mm 1.2L RF. I have the Schoeps Mini CMIT. And my audio is a little bit different now. So now I'm going into the DBX 286S channel strip, and then from there into the Tascam unit, into the R5C. So let me know how it sounds. And I've been working on my room a little bit too, and making it a bit less reflective. So let's get straight into it here. So the A7C2 and the A7R. So I watched one of the videos that I watched that I wanted to reference was James Jackson's, and he had a lot of really good points in that he doesn't know, and I agree with him, I don't know who these cameras are for. And by saying that, I mean this. As a working professional photographer, the things that they have stripped out of these cameras to strip them to a lower price point are things that working professional photographers would want, like redundancy of recording, or if not redundancy of recording, in the case of the A7 IV and the A7 R5, if it's going to have one card slot, have the CF Express Type A dual architecture to that, or the SD card on board. That's kind of an important one, as is the viewfinder. I understand it being a rangefinder style camera, but you know, EVFs are important. And I think the biggest one with the A7CR, I almost messed it up, is the absence of the screen that makes the A7R5 so awesome. Now I had the A7R4, used it for a couple years as my primary stills camera shooting interiors, and it was a bear to work with, the A7R4 was. Now with the A7R5, what Sony did was effectively fix the pain points around the A7R4. Still had that 61 megapixel resolution, but now you have the faster card speeds on board. You have a much better and stronger wireless tethering architecture on board. So with me, I use lights and I tether wirelessly to an iPad. The A7R5 had that. So these are the types of things too, by the way, that you don't see reviewers typically address, like the onboard apps, because Sony actually has a new one. They've gone away from the imaging edge onto a Creator Central or whatever they call it. And I initially didn't like it because it takes one more click to get into the menus, but I digress. We don't know what the A7C2 and the A7C are. Did I get that right? We don't know what they're going to have as far as the range and stuff. So to James's point, who exactly are these for? If you're going to strip out that many features, are they then overpriced for the features that you have left in the camera body? What would make me buy an A7C2 for $2,200 or whatever it is, when I can buy an A7 IV for just a few $100s more, get the faster CFX Type A card architecture? And what I'm going to point out too, that I haven't seen anybody see yet, I think I just discovered it and nobody's pointed this out. I'm going to get the faster card architecture. I'm going to get an EVF that works a little bit better. I am certainly going to get better thermal performance because it's a bigger, more robust body. Why would I buy for just a few hundred less the A7C2? I don't understand who this product is for, but I have a theory about this. I think by making this lesser body camera and making it only a couple $100s less expensive, what Sony has done is alleviate the need to reduce the price of the A7 IV. Because now the A7 IV is, what is it, 1 or 2 years old? 1 year old, I think. It's not that old, but by camera terms, that's ancient, right? There's other stuff on the drawing board and other things that are coming out from competitors that are going to be competing against that product. So this is when you would start seeing the price discounts on cameras like A7 IV. But if we were to, let's say, use some A7 IV parts bin type of stuff, strip out some features that nobody wants anyway, I mean, I guess that's how the conversation went, and make it a couple $100 cheaper, that means we can keep the A7 IV at its price. Because if you want a cheaper A7 IV, we have one of those for you now. Could be that. But let me get into, hey, King Kruk, good to see you, bud. Before I get into the comments here, let me get into the thing that I found online that I have not seen anybody address yet on the A7C II and the A7CR. And this has to do with how I am using these cameras. And so I am a full-time real estate photographer. So when I talk about cameras, that is the perspective that I'm coming from, as somebody who shoots interiors full-time, day in and day out. So one of the things that I do when I shoot interiors full-time is I use lights. So I'm using a flash ambient type of a workflow. And so specs relating to that type of workflow are going to be important to me when I'm looking at these new cameras. And so one of the things that was strange to me when I started looking at this stuff, I saw the B&H specs, which showed, let's see here, why do I not have this? Bear with me just a second here. I saw the B&H specs that showed when you have the A7C II, and this was the same with the A7CR, the maximum flash sync speed is 1/160th of a second. Now, this is important to me because, and this may not be important to everybody. In fact, it's not going to be important to everybody, but with flash sync speed, okay, if I have a 200 watt second light, that is the Godox 8200 Pro is the one that I will typically use. That is not going to be a powerful enough light to illuminate a large space. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bump up the ISO value of the camera, which is going to make my 200 watt second light orders of magnitude more powerful as my stops, by way of bumping on my ISO, go up. What that's also going to do is make my window light even brighter. It's going to be blowing in even more because now my sensor is more sensitive. However, okay, you can control window light with shutter speed. You won't affect the strobe because the strobe cycles faster than that shutter speed, right? So the ISO is still going to make the strobe more powerful, but by increasing your shutter speed, you're going to control that window light. And so by way of doing both things, you raise your ISO, you raise your shutter speed, you're going to make your light more powerful while controlling your window light, giving you a more balanced exposure. So that's why flash sync is important. And portraiture photographers, they use this type of technique too, with strobes, to be able to freeze motion and get, you know, the light powerful and such. So this is an important spec. Now, 1/160th is not really that good of a flash sync. The A7 IV that the A7 II is based on has a 1/250th of a second flash sync, as does the A7 R5 also has a 1/250th of a second flash sync speed. The A1's top of the pile, by the way, it has a 1/400th. So why then would a camera that Sony has now come out with, that is one of them based on the A7 IV and has all of the guts, even more so than the A7 IV because it has the AI focusing chip, I think it does on board, and the A7CR, which is the A7 R5 guts, why would they reduce the flash sync? And how are they reducing the flash sync? I think it has a slower shutter in it. It has a slower shutter in it that probably also is rated, the duty cycle is rated for less, you know, less of a duty cycle than the A7 IV shutter than the A7 R5 shutter. So even one more reason that these cameras are perhaps not going to be looked at by professionals in any kind of serious way. So let me get into the comments here, because I know that there are a few of them. I saw Josh Satin on board. Josh, I was going to mention you too. So Josh Satin, you should check out his channel too, if you're not there already. So Josh's big thing, he and I chat a lot. And his big thing is he's a video first guy, and his thing is, why is Sony, and not just Sony, I don't think, I think this is kind of everybody nowadays, but why are these companies continuing to make compact little tiny cameras with sensors from other larger cameras, and then saying that it does 4K 60 or it does this or it does that, when it's going to overheat like on your driveway, right, before you even take it out. And I think that's Josh's frustration recently. Carlos, bottom line, this keeps Sony in the mouth of people. And from a marketing perspective, they are doing their thing. You know, I absolutely agree with that, Carlos, but I have a little bit of a different take on it. And and I was thinking about exactly, so thank you for the segue for this inadvertently, because I was thinking about this before I came on too, about the whole Sony influencer thing and how disingenuous it has seemingly become with folks who are obviously on the Sony dole. They're getting the cameras early, or they're going to the press events, and then they are, you know, regurgitating whatever narrative Sony would like them to present their cameras like, and perhaps violating the trust of their audience, that they have grown their channel by being genuine with their audience. And so, you know, here's the thing. I don't fault Sony for sending out cameras to people with an audience. I don't think it makes bad business sense. It obviously doesn't, to do that. But when you are doing that from the position of being the market leader already, and I think that's who Sony has become, that obviously is going to be different depending on what type of stats you look at, what kind of sales stats and so forth. But I was just talking with Josh earlier today, and I said, you know what, I'm in a real estate video group, and I told him 100% of the posts in that group, this is amongst professionals that are out there working with these things daily, are all Sony. They're all using Sony. And the majority of them are using the A7S3 variant cameras. So A7S3 or FX3. And the ones that aren't are using the A7 IV, and they're working around the 4K 60 crop by putting wide angle, you know, super wide angle lenses on it. So it's not just, it seems, that Sony has so much of a market share on YouTube, but even amongst working pros. And this started with the A7 III. It seems like Sony is now the market leader. And so when you have this type of a tactic of slamming all the YouTube creators, you know, with your gear and having them say only good things about it, and perhaps burning some bridges with their audience that they've worked so hard to gain that trust with, I don't understand why as a market leader you have to do that. If your stuff was subpar, then I would get it, you know, because you need more market share, you need to sell product. But you know, not when you're coming from where they're coming from. I just don't get that. Did Tony N tear it apart for not having dual card slot? Oh, you know what? I haven't seen Northrup's video. I think he, after his leaking of the A7 IV early thing, is probably just going to be in Sony's pocket doing whatever they want him to say for a while. I don't know. Is that one of Tony's things? Is the dual card slot? I like having dual card slots. I've had SD cards. SD cards are awful, you know, which is another reason why I think it's kind of curious that if they're going to have one card slot in these new compact bodies, at least make it a dual, because they do that really well. Sony does with the CFX-A slot and the SD card, the dual slot that can accept one or the other. Why not do that? You know, because the CF Express cards or CFast cards in any flavor are more reliable than SD cards. And if you haven't had an SD card fail, it's just because you haven't shot enough on SD cards to have them fail yet. I've had two of them fail. One of them was a Sony Tough G card, and one of them was a Lexar card. So SD cards absolutely fail. So I get it if that's Tony's thing. I did see MH say that he was glad about the release because he hasn't updated his kit for 3-ish years, and that's kind of where I'm at too. So I shot Sony for many years and have recently gotten into Canon, more so because it's a commonality of lens mount between the Canon bodies and the red bodies that I use. But I would go back to, I don't have anything against Sony. I mean, Sony cameras are fantastic, you know, and they did me well for many years. So part of the thing that I said when I got out of Sony and got into Canon was, I'm going to sell all my Sony stuff. And here's the thing, all of my Sony lenses, especially at that point, after using them for 4 or 5 years, were getting long in the tooth. And so if I jump back into Sony and start rebuying these things, there will be newer things to get. And sure enough, as part of this announcement was the 16 to 35 GM Mark II. And the 16 to 35 OG version, the one version, was my daily workhorse real estate lens. And so it makes me feel better if I get back into Sony. It's like, okay, but now I'm getting, you know, the newer lens, so it doesn't seem like I'm just rebuying stuff that I'd sold. So I get that, totally get that. James Jackson, A7CR. Yeah, it's a young twister for the tongue twister. That's right. The A7C, it's just, you know, why are they, you know, cars do this too. It's like, why not call the thing like Steve? You know, it's like everybody's going to remember Steve's name. They're not going to remember A7CR3. King Kruk Gaming, what's happening? I think you should buy the A7CS. Oh, let me think of what the A7CS would be. The A7CS would be the A7 III, but without 2 card slots, definitely. The EVF wouldn't be nowhere near the A7 III EVF. A7S3 EVF is beautiful. The A7CS. I'll do it. I'll do it, and I'll make a review of it. How's that? Marketing means top of mind awareness, and Sony kills it in this space. That's absolutely true. I just wish that they did it a little bit differently, since they're coming from the position on top that they're coming from. Look, here's the thing, man. Like if Fuji did this, right? Fuji is either 3rd or 4th, depending on who's counting the sticks. I wouldn't care if Fuji did that, you know? But Sony's like, Sony makes arguably the best cameras out there anyway. You know, that's why, like when I was saying that the real estate videography Facebook group that I'm in, that's why so many of these working pros are already using Sony. These guys are not being, their buying decisions are not being influenced by whichever YouTube creator is spouting whatever about whichever camera. Their buying decision is being influenced by the preponderance of their experience steering them into one system or the other that's appropriate for the type of work that they're going out there and doing. And so when you look at it like that, when you look at it subjectively and say, what do Sony cameras do better than every other system on the planet? It's quite a few things, actually. It really is. You know, and like I said, I got into the Canons after being with Sony for so many years, really just for the commonality of the lens mount between the Canons and the red cameras. But I would go back to Sony if I like that GM 1635-2 lens, and I'd probably pair it with an A7 IV. You know, I would like the A7 IV to be a little bit less expensive, but I think that's one of the things that Sony did here is make it so they don't have to do that. James Jackson, funny enough, I made the same theory when I was on with Ordinary Filmmaker. They made them to make the A7 cameras better. I don't think I understand it. They made them to make the A7 cameras. Oh, so the A7 IV and the A7 R5, they look better in comparison. Yeah, I think that might be what they're doing. So and Canon does this too, okay? And there's something to be said for, you know, do these companies have to populate every $200 price increment up to $3,000 or so with a different camera body. Like, what exactly is the difference between like an R7 and an R8 and an R6? And it's like, well, you know, if I were to go out and work with one of these cameras, doing what I do, would I see an appreciable difference in the quality of my work coming out of any of them? I don't think so. So why are they doing that? You know, I mean, they all have a little bit different feature sets, but it's like, yo, they have the same lens mount. They use a lot of the same media. They've got really a lot of the same specs. Okay, sensors might be a little bit different size. Frame rates might be a little bit different. You know, maybe some of them have better thermals than others. Some have better screen than others, but it's the same damn camera. You know, and so why we have to have one populated every $200 increment, I have no idea. But that's what they decide they have to do. Josh Satin, hey, I was talking about you. Your ears must have been burning. I think the A7C was successful because they added a flippy screen to the A7 III. I agree. I'm curious if the A7C2 will sell well or not. I haven't really discerned anything about the A7C2 that is better than the A7 IV, with the exception of some of the streaming stuff. It looks like with the A7C2, you can stream 4K 30 over USB-C. And Gerald tested that and says that it doesn't overheat either unless you were to simultaneously record the stream as you are streaming 4K 30 over USB-C with the A7C2. So that would make it better than the A7 IV in that regard. But like for my purposes, the form factor being smaller and like, I don't know if there's any battery grips that you can get for them. I know that they have like the extended little grip piece on them that can make it a little bit more comfortable, but something to increase battery life and functionality, I don't know if that exists for these new ones. For my purposes, okay, just the fact that they've taken out a card, I don't like that. I don't like that they've taken out the fast cards. Because, yes, even though those CFX-A cards are expensive, they are very, very good cards. I mean, they're really fast. And they're compact, and it's genius the way that Sony does the dual slots with the, you know, be able to accept both the different cards. And so that they took out the 2 slots and that they made the one only UHS-2, I don't get that. And that doesn't sit well with me. You know, the viewfinder is like, I don't personally, I'm with James on this. You know, it's like what James was saying in his video. Like, I wouldn't buy an A7C2. I'd buy an A7 IV. It's a better camera. A7C2, I think they say has the AI focusing chip for like lizard eyeballs and stuff. Awesome. If you're like a pro lizard photographer, then you're going to love that. I don't know any of those. So I don't know, and the A7 IV AF is great, you know, and anybody who's used an A7 IV will tell you the same thing. The autofocus is awesome. You know, Sony has the best AF these days. You know, people used to rave about the Canon dual pixel autofocus. Sony is better now. Their standard AF in their cameras is better than the standard Canon AF in their cameras. True stuff, you know, and I've used most of them over the past few years now. That balance exposure statement should be a short on your channel. I know. Well, I actually have. I'll do that, Carlos. Thank you. Yeah, I've made a video before. You can look back on my channel about 1/400th of a second flash sync as it relates to the A1, and what I mean by that, because that's something that I bring up often enough because it's part of my workflow, and at least as often as when I bring it up, there's some confusion around it, you know, because it's kind of an esoteric type of feature and one that you're not typically going to run into unless you're out there working with cameras, you know. And so it's understanding who the YouTube audience is. The YouTube audience trends toward beginners. You certainly have pros looking at YouTube too. I mean, all of us are here. But it trends toward beginners, and so things like that don't seem to get a lot of traction and they create more confusion than anything. But I'll do that. I'll do that because I think it's a good suggestion, and thank you for it. King Correct Gaming, I'm with Josh Satin. Ignore the A7C2R and just get the Venice 2. You were going to be the one that got the Venice too. Remember, we nominated you as our leader to get the Venice too. Josh said Josh has a video actually of him attending, attending the trade show and he hefted a Venice too that was like all kitted out, asked how much it was, and then immediately put it down. So, Carlos, I think it's interesting how terms like AI equals value when AI really equals image processing algorithms. On the nose, right there. And here's the other thing: AI is part of my workflow, and anybody who are imaging professionals, whether you know it or not, AI is part of your workflow too. Sometimes it's obvious, like when something gets branded, like you're saying, as AI. So like the Photoshop beta that I have has AI generation for whatever. You can draw a box around something and say pink spotted dog, and it'll do pink spotted dog. So I use that actually all the time to remove things from real estate images. So if there's like a jalopy car parked in front, or there's a hose that's all askew, my thought process with images like that when I'm taking them on site is it going to take me more time to actually move this object, or is it going to take me more time to deal with it in post? And with tools like the Photoshop beta AI generative thing, it is so easy and spooky good. When you draw a box, like not even well, like just, kind of hack it around a hose and say, remove hose. And it does. And you're sitting there and you're wondering, like, how the hell does it know what's underneath it? Because that is what's underneath it, And the same thing with like cars and such. Like, how did it know that there was a bush that looks just like that behind that car? I don't know, because it's smarter than we are. Terminator coming up. Okay, Sony doesn't care about overheating because everyone has normalized it. It shouldn't be, though. Back in the day, it was like Sony got such a black eye over the overheating thing. I remember this. It's, the Sony cameras, they heat up. And then, but everybody else, Sony was the only one making like the little mirrorless cameras, and like Panasonic was doing it, right? But they had a pin or little sensor in it. And so, of course, they heated up because they were making the little tiny cameras. Everybody else these big chunky DSLRs, and they didn't heat up. So it shouldn't be normal, And like, I know and that, Carlos, you're a video guy. You're a commercial video guy. And so you wouldn't take a A7C R, whatever it is, on set, even if that was the best image quality. Let's say the thing came out, it's got amazing image quality, some new fancy codec with more latitude than R3D, and let's just say, for the sake of the conversation, that that's the case. You still wouldn't take it on set because you can't trust the thing. And so, normalized or not, that doesn't make any sense to me. If it's been normalized, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Put a fan in the thing, right? The new G2435-2 even worth it over the first one. That would be the 1635-2 GM. Here's the thing about that. The 16 to 35, the OG Sony 16 to 35 GM was like I said, my daily driver workhorse lens for many years. And I've had a lot of Sony lenses. Still have some Sony lenses just because those ones haven't sold yet. But I've had a lot of Sony lenses. That still, even though it was a, 5-year-old lens, 6-year-old lens, 5-year-old lens, I think, could be Sony's best lens. It is that good. The OG 16 to 35 G Master is a really, really good lens. And so what's funny is now that this new one has been unveiled, and I've been consuming some of the content about it from the reviewers who have had their hands on it and such, there seems to be an overarching theme, and that's that the new one is a bit smaller, a bit lighter, optically a bit better, but you have to be like shooting charts and zooming into hundreds and hundreds of percent to see any kind of real appreciable difference between the two. But they all say, but if you have the OG version, that's still such a good lens. And unless you're really jonesing for it being, you know, a couple 100 grams lighter, and I think it telescopes out a little bit less too. The new one does, you know. So the old one, when you zoom it, it'll come out a little bit more than the new one does. They say, you know, if you're starting from nothing, yes, the 2 model, that's the one to get. But if you already have the version 1, like if I still had the version 1 and I was using it daily, I don't think I would really be that attracted to the 2 version if I had the 1 version. So it depends, King Crook. You know, it depends on how you're asking. And that has more to do with the version 1 being an extraordinary lens than it does the new one being even better. The new one is better, but it's better in little tiny ways in a lot of different areas, which ends up being a better lens. But is it better enough to be hawking $2,000 lenses back and forth to get those new features? I think for a lot of people, no. And like I said, if I still had the version 1, I'd probably continue using the version 1. It wouldn't be worth it to me to get the new one. Sony still can't touch the R5C or the Z8 9. It depends on how you measure it. But yeah, I mean, I still think the A1 is the best 35 millimeter stills camera ever to be created by anybody. And there are several reasons why I think that the flash sync is one of them. You know, the flash sync is one of them. It's a 50 megapixel stacked sensor that has a super high frame rate, allegedly the same sensor that's in the Venice 2. It's got an enormous amount of dynamic range, more than the R5C or the Z8 and 9 could ever hope to have, especially by way of how it treats the highlights as they approach the super white, and the ability to recover that information in post. The codec is more robust than the Canon ones too. So that's the one thing I actually miss about the Sonys now that I'm into the Canons is how comparatively clippy the Canons are way up top. Not just in video, but that they only put C-Log 3 in their mirrorless cameras and don't allow for C-Log 2, especially in like the R3. So I have the R3 and I've been using the R3 a lot as my daily driver. And for video, that stacked 6K sensor can use C-Log 2. You know, I posted, you can check out on my channel, I posted a video a few back, a real estate video with the R3 using C-Log 2 RAW. And the only reason that Canon will not put that in the camera is to protect their cinema line. Sony doesn't really make that differentiation as much as Canon does, and so S-Log 3, their most aggressive video profile, is in everything. And their sensors can handle it too. That's the other part of that. You know, their sensors can handle the increased dynamic range. And that's true for stills too. And so when I'm out shooting stills and I have the R3 or the R5C that I'm using, and I'm doing exteriors, I will have an evaluative metering. And for exteriors, I'll typically be on an Aputure priority. I'll have an evaluative metering, which still does give still does weight it to whatever your focus point is. So my point is, I will have to dope that by going a bit more underexposed on the Canons than I ever did any of the Sonys. So not just the Alpha 1, but the A7 IV, the A7 R4, the A7 R3, you know, and all the different ones that I've had. I didn't have to dope it under as much because they're better at retaining the highlights than the Canon sensors are. And that's just that. I mean, even the R3, with its $6,000 only 24 megapixel stacked sensor, is not as good as the A7 IV in the highlights. Just isn't. So, you know, it depends on how you're measuring it. It really does. Rocky Malvia, good to see you. A7CS is the ZVE10. Josh, what do you think about the ZVE10? ZVE1, I mean. Yeah, same thing. You know, it's a little tiny camera that overheats because one of Sony's tenets of design, so there are 4 of them, and I don't know what the other 3 are, but I know one, and that is compactness of design. And that's why they're doing that. And Carlos, to your point, that's why it seems to be normalized now, right? I think that if people aren't clicking on links, if you hear the same story enough times and it follows you, the message, it sets roots in people and creates a call to action urgency, fear of missing out. Yeah, I agree. I agree. It helps though that Sony cameras are very robust. You know, so Sony makes great camera. You know, that's the thing. Like, I'm not throwing shade at Sony here. This whole thing is not. In fact, Carlos, you texted me beforehand when you saw that my thing was coming up. You said, "Oh, so you're gonna burn the bridge?" And then all the Sony fanboys like, maybe just singe it a little bit, you know. But I'm really not throwing shade at Sony here. In fact, I'm confused though. I don't understand why we need these cameras. I don't understand why we need the A7C II and the A7CR. What the hell's wrong with the A7 IV and the A7 R5? Who are these cameras for? Because you're not going to sell a 20. How much is the A7RC? See, I've messed it up, man. I was going to go the whole podcast without doing it. How much is that thing? It's like $3,000 or something, isn't it? So who are you selling that to? You're not selling it to some kid who walks into Best Buy looking to get into photography, right? You're selling it to somebody probably with a little bit more advanced of a skill set. And if that's your customer, why is he not buying the A7R5? Because it's worth it to buy that camera. For the Gumby screen alone, that thing's awesome, right? I don't disagree with you, Carlos. I'm just confused, man. I'm confused what they're trying to do here. You know, by populate every $200 price point increment with a different camera that does mostly the same things as all the rest of them. Price point, are they worth it? Maybe. You know, I mean, I don't know. This stuff, man, cameras are expensive. You know, cameras are expensive, and you know, the only reason that you and I and some of these other folks that are in this chat here have a lot of cameras is because we make money with them. You know, if I wasn't out making money with cameras, I wouldn't have an R3 and a Komodo X and you know, and all these. Are you kidding me? Like, it's what, just those two alone? That's like 15 grand worth of camera, right? Like, what? You know, I mean, this stuff's expensive, man. I thought you were gonna say Josh has a Venice. Josh needs a Venice. I speak on the devil here. Yeah, I'd rather have a car. No, you wouldn't. You drive some jalopy car, I bet. Let's see, Real Steel. Okay, everybody needs to check out this guy's channel too. So, Real Steel Productions, go check it out. I always wanted Samsung to continue in the camera space to see what modern smartphone processors could do in a camera. I wonder how Digic X, etc., compare to modern Snapdragons. That's kind of an interesting topic that you bring up because, you know, it kind of goes to the bigger overarching theme of the computational photography tech in smartphones travels way quicker and faster than anything that's in cameras. Okay, so Sony is right now bragging about their new AI chip that does like lizard eyeballs and stuff, and it's like, dude, Apple could do that in like a day. You know, but they haven't done it in a day because they've done even better stuff, you know, than that kind of. It's really slow going with the camera companies versus versus the cell phone companies. So yeah, I mean, I think once cameras start to implement computational type of photography stuff. So here's something to kind of bend your mind around, right? Canon's implementation of a DGO video sensor. So a sensor, and Ari's been doing this for years in their cameras, right? So a sensor that actually captures two different images at different exposure values and then composites them into one, making a higher dynamic image. At what point is that type of tech going to be normalized with the full frame type of cameras that we use without having to shoot like HDR brackets and then, you know, do some in-camera thing? Like, when is like the raw file going to just have more dynamic range and it be a composite of different images that it's taking simultaneously? I don't want to say like in fast succession because that would mean your exposures and it would have shutter speed implications and everything, but simultaneously. However Canon's doing it, however Ari's doing it, it's simultaneous. You know, your 1/60th of a second shutter speed is 1/60th of a second shutter speed, whether the DGO thing is working or not. It doesn't change that. So however, whatever type of sorcery that is, you know, when is that going to be commonplace with cameras? Because it seems like iPhones seem like they do that. And I don't know if that's what they actually do or not, but I think they're stacking a lot of different exposures that they're taking simultaneously to give you that HDR-like image that is popping up on your screen there. And if that would alleviate overheating, I think it'd make it even more hot. But you're talking about the Snapdragon processor. Yeah, that's one of the things I think that Canon needs to do with the R1 and the R5C Mark II. One of the things they need to do is it's not just that the thermal architecture is behind the competition. It's that the processing isn't as efficient either, and that's pretty easy to see if you have, like, I've had a gripped A1 and a gripped R5, OG R5, together at the same time shooting, and the gripped A1 lasts a lot longer than the gripped R5. Shooting similar type of specs, you know, and settings and such. And so I was also wirelessly tethering. Okay, and so the only kind of real conclusion you can make from that is something in the Canon is not nearly as efficient, or the Sony Z battery is so much better than the most modern Canon battery, the LPE6NH, or some combination thereof. But, you know, maybe like you said, you know, the cell phone processors, they are certainly more efficient. They have to be, you know, and they can't be overheating in those tiny little bodies, right? Do it from the gram. Take a photo with it next year at NAB. Yeah, I think you should buy one. A1 sensor is, yeah, A1 sensor is, it's something really special. It really is. You know, I can't wait to see what the A1 Mark II is, because I think if they do nothing, if Sony does nothing with the A1, but keep that same sensor, same body, the body's fantastic, give it the Gumby screen from the A7 R5, I can't think of anything else that I would want with the A. I mean, it's that good. I can't think of anything else I would want with the A1. There are all kinds of things I want with most other cameras. But the A1 is that good of a camera that you give it the Gumby screen and whatever that AI lizard eyeball thing is, you know, people want that. Oh, I know, and you got to have the focus breathing compensation thing, because people are getting like pitchforks for that right now, even though the A1's a stills camera, so go figure. Carlos, ultimately, it's about delivery. If images will end up on the web, absolutely not worth upgrading. If you're printing and having the high resolution printers, it will make a difference. Yeah, absolutely. And I go over this a little bit too with with the real estate stuff, where people will say, well, you know, for real estate photography, the MLS is mangling it down to, like, you know, 3 megapixels. You know, and that's true, but you can still see. Not only can you still see the high resolution, but to your point, when you start shooting luxury properties and or for builders, and you are framing things with room for copy, because the thing with like builders is their marketing of these properties and of their product and of their service is much more robust than, say, the Joe Schmo real estate agent, right? So they, like, I've walked into a building, the builder's like headquarters, and seen my photography on the wall. And that was actually pretty humbling when that happened. I'm not gonna lie, you know, I was a little bit starstruck. It's like, those are mine, you know, but okay, to that point though, there were some pretty big prints too. And because I had shot that with the whatever I did, it was a high resolution Sony body, because that's mostly what I was shooting at that point. It looked good. You know, it looked good. I think it was metal, I think. It was like, they were like big glossy metal ones, you know, and they look good. Like, would it have looked as good if I had shot like a 24 megapixel? Maybe. You know, the R3 is pretty good, even though it's only 24 megapixel, but I really chalk that up to the RF lenses being so punchy and so contrasty and so saturated that even a 24 megapixel camera like the R3, looks, kind of renders a little bit sharper than what a 24 megapixel camera otherwise would, because you've got that really punchy RF glass in front of it. So maybe another conversation for another day. Canon does protect their different camera lines, and their image processing ensures that they underperform. This is why Magic Lantern on very affordable cameras rocks. Is that still a thing? I remember that was a thing with like that was back in like the 5DS 2 or 3 days or whatever, and it would unlock. I forgot how it worked. I never used it. I just knew it was a thing. I need the Fuji GFX 100 so I can make my thumbnails really pop. Yeah, his trophy camera. That's what he calls it, his GFX. And I'm still kind of curious about those. Sony makes great cameras even if they overheat. Yeah, they make great cameras until they overheat. The same thing was true. See, here's the thing too, man. Like, Sony didn't learn from Canon with the whole R5 thing. It was the thing, man. Like, Canon said, this is an 8K camera. And then it shot 8K for like 5 minutes, and you got to let it cool down for like an hour. You know, Sony didn't learn from that. Like, that was a thing. It was quite a black eye for a long time. Then they ended up fixing it with the firmwares. They should have done that quicker, right? James, imagine if Canon had done this, released 2 cameras with missing these features at those prices, they would be eviscerated. Now, I mean, they have, haven't they? I mean, that's what the R8 is. R8 is a stripped out R6 II. And, you know, and the same thing, too, with the R8 versus the R6 II. Like, I'd rather have the R6 II. It's a better camera, right? It's got 2 card slots. It's got better exposure tools. Like, I think the R6 II does false color, and the R8 doesn't if you're shooting video, right? R6 II, I think, has a better focusing system on board. It does faster frame rates with electronic shutter, you know, shooting stills. Like, I mean, there are a lot of reasons to take the R6 II over the R8. I don't know why you'd have the R8. Computational photography doesn't make a person a better photographer, which really allow our skills to be showcased. That, I think, is an important point. And kind of along with what I was chatting with Josh about earlier. So I recently posted a video up showing a flash ambient workflow throughout a home. And the point of this video was to show that using lights with real estate photography can be, if not as fast, not that much slower than shooting HDR. And on that video, I had a comment from a young man who says, I'm just starting out. So can you list all of the things that you used on this video for me? And I responded to him and I said, you know what, I'd be happy to do that, but you have to know that, I mean, this is like the Canon R3, the RF50, I've got an Arca Swiss geared head. Like, I mean, this is probably like 10 grand worth of gear, you know, that I'm using right now and if you're just starting out, I would not recommend that this is what you go out and buy, you know. And he came back and he says, you know, thank you for that. Could you maybe recommend what I should be looking for? And it got me to thinking, like, maybe I should do a video and say, okay, if I'm starting out, let's say I've got a $500 budget, you know. So I'm talking like, you know, I'm scouting eBay for like some old war wagon, like crop body DSLR, right, for like $100. And then I'm going out and getting a, you know, a lens for $100. And then I'm finding the cheapest tripod and ball head, you know, and a speed light, you know. It's like, and then do a video, a similar type of video. Okay, me working with that kind of stuff and show the finished images. Because if I were to do that, there wouldn't be that much difference between the $10,000 setup and the $500 setup. So why then would I use a $10,000 setup, right? Because it makes my life easier. It's workflow at that point. I can work faster with these tools. They're more reliable. They're more consistent. All that, right? I mean, there's reasons that the stuff costs that, but. You know, but I've been thinking about that, doing kind of a video like that, because I agree. It's all about the skill set. Basically, if you can play an instrument and get a job done, it's very different than virtual instruments and Pro Tools. Totally. Yeah. Okay, Real Steel. Thanks for the shout out. Maybe I'll post something again sometime. In the meantime, I enjoy all you folks in here. I do too. This is a cool community, man. Like, I enjoy being part of it. It's funny that camera manufacturers keep trying to make things small and compact, but I'm looking at it like mirrorless are already by design small cameras, especially Sony's. I don't need smaller. Compactness of design. It's one of the Sony tenets. You know, it's just, dude, put a fan in it. Like the R5. Okay, so the R5 and the R5C. This is a good example of this. I've had both at the same time. I still have the R5C. Don't have the R5 anymore. But when I have both at the same time, the way that they handle and the way that I use them and such, they are identical. And so you look at them you look at the specs, or you look at like the top-down view of like the R5 and the R5C, and the R5C is so much bigger because of that fan. But I'm telling you, in use, it makes zero difference. They handle exactly the same, you know? And so, like, why doesn't Sony just put a fan in the thing? And that would alleviate all of their woes. Phones overheat, it happens. It does. I've had phones. You know what? I have my phone occasionally overheat if it's like sitting on the passenger side and the sun's beating down on it. I have had that happen. That's why you keep getting overheating, micro jitters, and weird handling with their big full frame glass. That's why we keep getting overheating, micro jitters, and weird handling with their big full frame glass. I don't know what that is responding or referencing to. NX1 is the only camera I know that used a current smartphone CPU, and as far as I know, any current camera CPU is generations behind current. Totally, yeah. There's that whole, you know, the whole camera space just doesn't work nearly as quickly as the whole pretty much any other tech space. You know, tech space, cars. I mean, whatever you want to talk about, it goes a lot faster than the cameras we use now are largely the same cameras that we used 10 years ago. You know, they're just a little bit better. You know, they have a little bit more dynamic range, and, you know, we're shooting to sensors and not film anymore, but it's like essentially it's the same thing, really. I had a commenter, Dave, the wealthy enthusiast. I had a commenter, Dave, the wealthy enthusiast would want the A7. I think the commenter today, wealthy enthusiasts want the A7CR. I guess I could see that, but as big of a name Sony is for the people, Hasselblad and Leica still reign supreme. It's funny, before I read through that comment, I was already thinking of Leica with the Q2s and the Q3s and stuff. Like, for that type of like a small rangefinder camera, I think the wealthy enthusiast is buying a Q2 or a Q3. I really don't see who the A7CR is for, you know, because I agree with you. You got Hasselblad and Leica out there for those people, you know. Regarding batteries, whatever they make an R5C2, they got to fix the battery issue. Maybe a new, smaller BP for all their mirrorless cams can only add so many suffixes to LPE6. But they can add like 2s and Rs, apparently, you know, if Sony made it. the LPE6 NHR2. Yeah, no, I agree. You know, and a lot of people too about the battery life with the R5C. People love to knock the battery life with the R5C. You have to rig it out. And to me, that's problematic because I want to use it as what it is. I want to use it as a compact cinema camera. You can't even use it as a compact cinema camera because all the best resolutions and frame rates, you got to give it external power anyway, you know, through the USB-C. So that to me is the miss, more so than the battery life being whatever it is. It's that this thing can't even get the voltage that it needs to run like 8K RAW with autofocus on the lens without feeding it USB-C power. That's what I would like to see changed on that, you know, is just give me full functionality with the camera within its own package. True, the R8 1500 versus 2200 A7C2. I mean, no, I get it, you know, but, you know, here's the thing too, like $700 in today's money. First off, cameras are either tools for working pros or toys for well-heeled enthusiasts. There are not poor people who are not making money with a camera buying an R8 or an A7C2 or an R6II. There aren't, you know. And to the people who are buying a $1,500 camera, a $2,200 camera, that's about the same. You know, that's not going to break these people one way or the other. That's not a lot of money in today's money. You know, not for the type of people who are buying these cameras to begin with. I don't think. You know, we're not talking about little point and shoots here. You know, I mean, they're all expensive. All this stuff is. Speed matters, but I think you should show the pull. That's right. The pull. Did you buy one? I remember. So Carlos and I, for those of you who don't know, we've got kind of a Polaroid thing going where we were gonna see how good we could how good we could do professional work on Polaroid cameras. I would likely buy an R5 again because of IBIS. The R5 IBIS kind of sucks, dude. Like the Sony has better IBIS. I hate the IBIS on the Canons. You know, that's why I'm happy as a clam with the R5C that has a pin sensor, and the R3, which has IBIS. I really use the R3 as a stills camera, and when I do use it as a video camera, the couple times that I have, it's on a gimbal. So the IBIS, but you know, the whole wobbling thing, man, it sucks. I do like though that the RF lenses are stabilized, most of them. Mr. Sand, hey, good to see you. I'm a pro lizard photographer and my Polaroid setup works just fine. There's this dude in the red, Carlos, have you seen the dude in the red group where he shoots like these poisonous snakes with a Komodo with a 12 millimeter lens on it, right? So the dude's like right there, and it's like, you know what? Like, I don't know when you're gonna die, dude, but I'm pretty sure I know how, you know? And I always clown him because of it. He's like back in the Amazon or somewhere. It's also weird to me how publishers like everyone who streams is pushing to keep streaming media standard 720p, not even full HD. Is that true? I mean, are they keeping that, or is it just like a bandwidth issue or something? Dude, the battery life on the R5C, why can't we have a battery grip that uses the R3 batteries? Or like I've heard Josh say before, why not design a battery grip where the whole thing is a battery? Instead of like a battery grip where you pull out a tray and you've got the LPE6s or the R3 batteries or whatever, why not just have like the Anchor power brick style, like a battery grip that is a battery? You know, I mean, that makes sense to me. You know, and people will say, oh, well, you can't swap, you can swap it out. You can swap it out for another battery grip, you know? James, regarding the R5C, yeah, I wish Canon would just gone with the BPA 30 battery. Yeah, like the rest of their cinema cameras. Yeah, the BPA 30s are way better. And so I've got a couple of them for my C200s. Totally. You know, it's, I don't know. So for me, it's more of a voltage thing, you know, than anything. I just want all of the frame rates and codecs and everything to be available to me with the product being the form factor that it comes to me in, you know, without me having to feed it external power just to shoot 8K 60 and have autofocus too. Carlos, yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's true. And yeah, it's a bandwidth issue. That's what I thought. Seems like a bandwidth issue. Woo! I got through all of the comments, and thank you guys for being with me. Look, it's 1 hour and 3, which is I try to keep these to about an hour anyway. Thanks for joining me, guys. Really, so I love it when these live streams are robust. Let me know what you think about the R5CR. Oh shit, did I do it? I don't know. I think I did it. The R5C2, R5. I don't know, man. Yeah, Steve. I'm gonna call it Steve. And I'll see you guys later.